All right, today's daf is Chav Ches 28. We are at 27b towards the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah that the only way to dispose of chametz was to burn it. And the Gemara said that Rabbi Yehuda had proposed a way to know that that's the way to destroy your chametz from the fact that nosar, a leftover carbon, to the next morning has to be burned. And this is a more severe prohibition, so for sure it needs to be burned. Why is it more severe? Because the Torah says chametz can't even be seen or be in your possession, so for sure it needs to be burned. The Gemara responded that that's not a good comparison, because we find nosar. We find there's a leniency that's going to end up happening here. That if the only way to burn chametz, to get rid of chametz, is by burning it, but the Torah said you have to get rid of chametz, and if you don't have a fire to burn it with, you're going to end up with chametz in your house. So you can't tell me that that you need to only burn the chametz, and you're going to learn it from nosar, because I have a problem. If that's the case, you're going to end up with chametz that actually is not burned and in your possession. So this is about 10, 12 lines from the bottom. So Rabbi Yehuda came up with another argument, another din. Nosar asav achila. Nosar, you're not allowed to eat the leftover korban. V'chametz asav achila. And chametz is also prohibited in eating. Just as nosar needs to be burned, so too chametz needs to be burned. So when we find other things that are prohibited in eating, and you don't have to burn it, such as non-kosher meat. You're not allowed to eat it, but you don't have to burn it. So no, there's a distinction, as we'll explain that nosar actually asab achila ubahana. Nosar is actually distinct from nevela in as much as that it is prohibited, both you can't eat it and you may not benefit from it. And so to chametz, and therefore, man nosar ton sreifa, just as nosar is required to burn it, af chametz ton sreifa, so to chametz you should be required to burn it. Well, we actually have other things that you're not allowed to eat or benefit from, and you don't have to burn it, like shor haniskel, an animal that gored and killed and is being put down. You're not allowed to eat it. You're not allowed to benefit from it. Yet it does not require to be burned. So I can make a distinction this way. Nosar actually is triply strength. It's prohibited in eating. You're not allowed to benefit from it. And if you eat it, there's the prohibition. The punishment is kares. The soul is detached from its source. And so to chametz, it has the severity both that you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to benefit from it, and the punishment is kares. So to nosar b'sreifa, chametz b'sreifa, just as nosar you have to burn, so to chametz you should have to burn. Well, the fats of a shor haniskel, an animal that gored, an ox that gored, had been put down because it killed. So you're not allowed to benefit from it. And if you eat the forbidden fats in there, there's kares as well, and yet you don't have to burn it. You're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to benefit from it, and the punishment is kares. And yet there's no requirement of sreifa, of burning these forbidden fats. And so now we go to 28a, Chav Ches Amud Aleph at the top. So Rabbi Yehuda says, you know what? I have another way of proving this idea. Nosar yeshne bebal tasiru. The Torah prohibits leaving nosar and putting it on, leaving it over to the next day, which is a similar prohibition to what the Torah says you're not allowed to keep chametz in your possession. But chametz b'bal tasiru, chametz also you're not allowed to keep it in your possession. So since the Torah says do not leave it over to the next day, do not leave chametz in your possession, that's different than all other prohibitions. Non-kosher foods and everything else we mentioned, the Torah doesn't say don't own it. The Torah doesn't say don't have it in your possession. Here it says, don't leave it to the next day. Don't leave the chametz to the next day. And so if one needs to be burned, the other needs to be burned. Well, I actually have two karbanas, asham talui, a carbon which is an asham, a sin offering, when somebody is uncertain whether they did a prohibition or not. In other words, they ate meat, they ate fats, they're just not sure, was this the forbidden fats or the kosher fats? And they know that it was there. Okay, so that's a asham talui. And chatas ha'oif, and also a bird that's a chatas, a sin offering for a bird sin offering, which abala safek, which comes for a doubt, meaning that one of the karbanas that a woman after birth brings is two birds, right? She'll bring two birds. One is an oila, one is a chatas, and the chatas is now in a doubt. What's the case of a doubt? Where she had a miscarriage, and it's a question of whether or not this miscarriage was of an embryo or a fetus. A fetus, she would have to, so if it's after 40 days of gestation, so then she would have to bring a carbon. If it was before that, she wouldn't. And so this is in this in-between case. She's not sure whether or not it is, and so she's bringing this carbon in doubt. And about that particular thing, these two karbanos, a chatas that came as a doubt, and asham talui. So this chatas, she would bring it in a matter of doubt, saying like this: I'm gifting this to the Beis Hamikdash if I don't owe it, and if I do owe it, then I'm bringing it as my obligation. And it can't be eaten because because the halacha is that a korban, the way they would do it, they would shecht it differently. In any case, so there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan in the Gemara and Tmura, whether a chatas ha'of, a bird chatas offering that came for a mistake, whether, since it can't be eaten anyhow, whether it gets burned or not. Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't burn it, you just toss it into the stream that runs through the Azara, through the Beis Hamikdash, and it gets washed away. So they said to Rabbi Yehuda, you, according to your opinion, lidvarecha, that you say that you don't have to burn this carbon, which can't be eaten, so it's going to be leftover, so you can't eat it, you don't have to burn it. So that's proof that not every carbon, which you're not allowed to leave over, and yet it doesn't. If you did, it gets burned. Not every carbon's that way. Shehem b'balta tiru. The Torah says over there also, it's a carbon. You're not allowed to leave it over. Even though we say that it needs to be burned, you say that it just has to be buried. It doesn't have to be burned. So we find a particular carbon that is not allowed to be left over, and yet it doesn't get burned. So to chametz doesn't have to be burned. Shasak Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda was silent. This was a contradiction from his own opinion. Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef said, "Hained Amri Inshi." This is what people say. Kafa dechata nagra begava nisruf chardala. The spoon, which the spice maker used in order to make the grind the spice, is the spoon that he burnt his tongue with when he ate the mustard. It was so sharp. That's one version. Rashi has another version that it means that that same spoon is the way he ate the mustard. In other words, it is by the source itself that it caused the proof. Over here too, Rabbi Yehuda, by his own opinion, where he said in a carbon in this chatas bird that came on a doubt that you don't have to burn it. From there, they brought proof against him, and Abaya brought Abaya Amar. Abaya says Sadna Besadni Yosef Medvil Yadi Mishtalim, that the smith who makes handcuffs, basically makes these chains. When he steals, he could himself be locked up with it. Rav Amar Rava says Gira begiri maktil madvel yadim mishtalim, that the one who makes the arrows for the bow and arrow, he himself could get paid by itself getting injured from it. In any case, in other words, in this particular case, the Gemara brought proof. The Chachamim brought proof against Rabbi Yehuda from his own opinion, even though they didn't disagree. They didn't agree to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in regards to the bird chatas, because they say there it doesn't need to be burned. But Rabbi Yehuda himself says it doesn't. So his proof to chametz, saying chametz needs to be burned on account of that, the Torah says not to keep it. Well, actually, we have another case according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, that's contradictory. Okay, so this is the end of the explanation of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, who says that chametz should be burned. However, the Chachamim disagree, and they say that mafarer v'zol ruach, you grind it up and you crumble it up and you toss it to the wind, or you throw it into the water. And the Gemara is going to ask, when the Mishnah said that you grind it up or you crumble it up and you toss it to the wind, or throw it into the water, does that also require grinding it up? What's the meaning of this teaching? Mefarer, you grind it up, v'zora l'ruach, and also toss it to the wind, and similarly, you would have to break it up, mefarer v'mataliyam, and then toss it into the sea, also by breaking it up and tossing it to the sea. Or dilma mefarer v'zora l'ruach, or the part that says you're going to crumble it up, mafarer, is only on the throwing it to the wind, because that's when the wind will blow it around. If it's too heavy, the wind won't blow it around. Aval mataliyam, but if you toss it into the sea, it can be even be be'ene, an entire bread. You toss it into the sea because it's going to fall apart from getting soggy. And in fact, in regards to idolatry, we have a similar teaching. Rabbi Yossi says that when somebody has idolatry and needs to be destroyed, so shoychek v'zara l'rach, you have to grind it up, and that's a term that's for food. You can say mefarer, crumble it, but by metals you're not going to do that. So for that you're going to grind it up, v'zara l'rach, and toss it to the wind. Oy mataliyam, or toss it into the sea. And there too, the question is, what is the meaning there? Shoychek v'zara l'rach v'shechek mataliyam, and both when you toss it to the air, to the wind, or you toss it to the sea, you have to grind it up. Or only when you toss it to the wind do you have to grind it up. But when you're tossing it to the sea, it's sufficient to just toss it in the sea as is. So Rabbi says it is logical that for idolatry, an idol, that you're going to toss it into the Dead Sea, where the salt it will cause corrosion and really destroy it. So so therefore you don't need to you don't need to grind it up. Chametz, the Lashar Nahar is kasel, but chametz, where you're tossing it to other places, to other waters, but you need to grind it up because the water itself is not really going to destroy it. Rav Yosef said quite the contrary. No, not totally contrary, but at least your argument doesn't stand. It's logical to say that they're equal. Avodah Zarah, which doesn't get ground up, doesn't really disintegrate, so that needs to be ground up. Chametz, the mamis lebaypir, but chametz, which would just get soggy and fall apart, you don't have to grind it up. And indeed, there's a brisa like each one of these opinions. Tanakh Avasei de Rabba, Tanakh Avasei de Rav Yosef. Tanakh Avasei de Rabba. We have a concurring brisa to Rabba. Somebody's traveling in the desert, and he has chametz. What does he do? It's time to get rid of chametz. So mafare, he has to grind it up and crumble it. V'zara l'rach, and toss it to the wind. If he's in the boat, mafare mataliyam, he has to crumble it and toss it into the sea. So you see that he has to crumble it. Tanakh Avasei de Rav Yosef. However, we have a brisa that concurs with Rav Yosef. Somebody's traveling in the desert. Shochek v'zara l'ruach. He has to grind it up, and this is by avodah zara, and toss it to the wind. He's on a boat. Shochek u'mataliyam. He has to grind it up and toss it into the sea. So you see that even avodah zara you have to grind up. So now shrika kashil Rabbah. So that second brisa is difficult to Rabba, who said that avodah zara, which you toss into the Dead Sea, you don't have to grind up. And pure kashal Rav Yosef, and the grinding up of and the crumbling of bread, which you have to toss into the sea, is a question to Rav Yosef. So shchika l'Rabba l'kasher. So Rabba is going to respond and say, no question. Hali Yama Melach. When you toss it into the Dead Sea, so there is no concern, and you don't have to grind it up because the corrosion is going to happen on its own. Hala Shar Naharis. But if you throw it to other bodies of water, there you actually have to grind it up before you toss it in. And as Rashi points out, there weren't many boats traveling on the Dead Sea, and therefore it wasn't really a concern. This brisa that says that you're on a boat and you toss it into the water, that's talking about other bodies of water, not the Dead Sea. And Rav Yosef and Rav Yosef is also not a question because it depends. If we're talking about that you have bread, you toss it into the water, and that's fine. But if you have a sack of grain, of actual wheat kernels, it's not sufficient to just toss it in as a whole thing because that could be found. And you have a whole bunch of kernels. So you have to open that bag and individual kernels toss in because that nobody's going to be able to gather up and collect the chametz, and there's no concern that it'll be collected as chametz on Pesach. The next Mishnah talks about if it's is going to talk about the prohibition of chametz before Pesach on the afternoon where you're not allowed to own it anymore, on Pesach, and after Pesach. And we begin the idea of that you're not allowed to benefit from Pesach, from chametz that somebody had possession of on Pesach. A Jew had possession of on Pesach in violation. So chametz shel nachrish of Pesach mutabana. A non-Jew owned chametz on Pesach, you can benefit from it after Pesach, no problem. V'shel Yisrael, but if a Jew had it, asa bahana, you're not allowed to benefit from that chametz after Pesach. Because the Torah says you shouldn't have chametz yourself. The Gemara is going to explain that because of the severity of the prohibition, therefore the Chachamim find him that he cannot benefit from the chametz after Pesach. Mani masnitin. So whose opinion is our Mishnah? Lo Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbi Shimon, lo Rabbi Yosef Galili. It's not Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, or Rabbi Yosef Galili, as we'll see. Mahi. What is this discussion? The Tani we learned. Chametz. Bein lefnei zmane, bein lachas zmane. Whether we're talking about chametz before Pesach comes in the 6 hours from noon until when Pesach sets in, or once Pesach is over, and once Pesach comes, so there's going to be a prohibition, and if you eat it, there is kares. There's a prohibition and belav, b'tov zmana belav kares. There's kares on Pesach, and after Pesach there's just a prohibition. So again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, from noon for the 6 hours until Yontif, chametz is prohibited. Yontif sets in for a full 7 days. There's kares, prohibition to benefit from it, and if somebody eats it, there's kares, their soul is cut off from its source. After Pesach, there's no longer kares, but there is a prohibition. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. We now turn to Chav Ches Amud Beis 28b. Rabbi Shimon Omer, chametz l'fnei zman lachas zman eino v'olav b'li klum. Rabbi Shimon says, I disagree. Chametz before Pesach or after Pesach, no prohibition whatsoever. Toich zmanei ovelav b'kares ubelav. On Yantiv, there's a prohibition and also kares. There's the punishment of kares. And at the same time that it's prohibited in benefit, it is also prohibited in eating. It's also prohibited in benefit. And here, the middle of the brisa, the Gemara interjects and says, "Asal Tanakama." This actually is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the first opinion, as we'll see whether Rabbi Shimon holds about this, holds a prohibition of benefit or not. Rabbi Yosef Galili Omer, however, Rabbi Yosef Galili says, "Tamal atzmacha, hey chametz asabana kol shiva." He says, where did you get this from? The chametz is prohibited in benefit also 7 days of Yontif. It's not prohibited in benefit. Even on Yontif, you're allowed to benefit from it. This was the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Galili. We saw this earlier. And however, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, and as we saw earlier, the Chachamim saying that chametz is prohibited in benefit as well, as we had a lengthy discussion where we know this from Hanania. We saw that Chizkiah said that it's because the Torah said a peculiar way, lo yeh achel, in the reflexive, it shall not be eaten. You cannot benefit from it because it cannot be a source of your sustenance indirectly, where you barter for it and so on. And the opinion of Rabbi Abo that says that anytime the Torah says not to eat something, it means also it's prohibited in benefit unless the Torah explicitly says you may benefit from it. So the Gemara says, and where do we know that somebody eats chametz from noon and on? There is a Torah prohibition. Shenema, it says l'sechel alav chametz. The Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says because the Torah says do not eat upon it the chametz. And now this upon it is referring to the Korban Pesach. And when do you bring the Korban Pesach? In the afternoon of the 14th. So from noon in the 14th and on, when there's already the obligation of the Korban Pesach, you may not eat chametz. That's the way Rabbi Yehuda learns this. Lo sochel alav chametz. Don't eat chametz upon it, upon the Korban. Amalei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. He says, can you really say that that's the meaning of that verse, that you shouldn't eat it already from the 14th at 6 hours into the day, meaning at noon? There's already a prohibition, but the Torah explicitly says, the Torah says, it says the next words after the verse that you just brought, that don't eat upon it chametz, meaning the Korban Pesach, it says for 7 days. That means from the onset of Pesach to the end of Pesach, but not before, because then there would be more than 7 days. It explicitly says shivas yamim, for 7 days you may not eat chametz. 7 days you shall eat matzah. So that's compared. So why does it say do not eat upon it chametz? It's to tell you that don't eat upon it at the time that you have obligation of eating matzah. You may not eat chametz. However, if you don't have the positive commandment, the obligation of eating matzah, then there's no prohibition of eating chametz. So great. So Rabbi Shimon disagrees and says there's no prohibition of chametz prior to Yontif itself. It's only at the onset of Yontif, because it says 7 days. So what's Rabbi Yehuda's response? My time at Rabbi Yehuda plus a Kriya Ksivi. So Rabbi Yehuda says there are three verses. The Torah says, and this is in Shemos 12:3. The Torah says that Moshe says to the people, remember this day of that you leave Mitzrayim, from the house of bondage, from the servitude, because Hashem takes you out with a mighty hand. V'lo yachel chametz. You shall not have chametz be eaten, right? And this is the verse that we saw earlier, that because it says in a reflexive, Chizkiah learned from there that it means that there's also a prohibition and benefit. So it says, do not eat chametz. And it also says in a chapter before that, in 12:20, it says, "V'chol machmetzes lo zachelu," and any leavening, anything that causes the fermentation of the bread, shall not be eaten in all of your dwelling places. You shall eat matzah. So it says all machmetzes may not be eaten. The second verse, and then it also says in the verse that we saw earlier, which is really at the end in the fifth book of the Torah, in Devarim, in Devarim 16:3. The Torah says, "Lo sechal olav chametz." Do not eat chametz upon it. For 7 days you should eat matzah. So sachad lefnei zman. He says, so one of them is coming before to tell you that there's a prohibition of eating chametz prior to the onset of Yontif. Right. So. Right. So what is coming before Yontif, and that's the verse of Lo Yachel Chametz, that chametz should not be eaten. And V'chad La'achas Maneh, one is coming to tell you that after Yontif, that even afterwards you may not benefit from it, and that's the verse that says Kol Machmetzes Lo Zachelu. And V'chad La'achas Maneh, and one is for during Yontif, and that's where it says Lo Sechel Olav Chametz Shivas Yom Techel Olav Matzas. That when you eat matzah, there's a prohibition of eating chametz as well. We're Rabbi Shimon. So what does Rabbi Shimon do with the three verses? One is for during Yantav itself. And the verse that says, all leavening you shall not eat, and that's the verse that we said is in Shemos 12. He needs that for another teaching that the Brisa teaches. The Brisa says, chametz, ainli elashanas chametz me'elov. The Torah says, don't eat chametz, perhaps only if it became fermented on its own. Machmas davar achaminayin. How do you know if something else fermented it? There's a prohibition. In other words, maybe it's only prohibited if you leave the bread out, the dough, long enough. You didn't put any yeast in. You put flour and water together, and you let it be there enough so that it would ferment. But perhaps that's called chametz. But perhaps if I put in an agent that's going to make it turn into chametz, maybe that's not considered chametz because it itself did not ferment. So therefore the Torah says, all leavening you shall not eat, anything that was, whether it happened on its own or it was caused by something else. And the teaching of lo yachel chametz, that chametz shall not be eaten, which we saw was Chizkiya's source for saying that it's even prohibited in benefit. Look at the Tanya, he needs it for something else. How do we know that the prohibition of chametz in Egypt itself was only the one day of Pesach? In Egypt, they didn't have a 7-day prohibition of chametz. It was only on the day itself. It says, you shall not eat chametz. And then the next verse says, today you are going to leave in the month of Aviv, in the month of the spring. Now, since it says the next word after you shall not eat chametz begins the next verse of today you are going to leave, that tells us that the prohibition of eating chametz is only for today. Now, how does Rabbi Yehuda know this idea that Rabbi Shimon said, that not only is chametz prohibited if it itself turned fermented, but even if you put in an agent, a leavening agent, which is going to cause it to ferment, that's also prohibited. It says it's true. The teaching of chametz is there to tell you that it's only one day, but the Torah calls it chametz, machmetzes. So the fact that the Torah calls it machmetzes, it tells me that it is whether it became leavened itself or something else caused it. The Rabbi Yossi Aglili Minoli. And how does he know the teaching of Rabbi Yossi Aglili that in Mitzrayim they only had a prohibition of chametz one day? So we have two ways of responding to that. Either he also says, look, he learns that from the next verse where the word hayom today is immediately follows. Or as we generally know, this concept of juxtaposition, we say a drash based on the Torah putting two things next to each other, that Rabbi Yehuda only says that's a valid drash in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, in the 5th book of the Torah. In the first 4 Sefarim, he actually does not generally say a drash of smuchin, of juxtaposition. And so over here too, he's going to say, indeed, maybe we don't know that, and we don't have proof that tells us that in chametz that they only had a single day of prohibition of chametz when they left Mitzrayim. Maybe for the next 6 days as they traveled, also they only ate matzah and not chametz. Amar Mar. So we had the teacher had said. So we had a statement earlier. How do we know that noon on Erev Pesach, the entire afternoon, if somebody eats chametz, he transgresses a Torah prohibition? Shenema, for it says, Lo sechel alav chametz. That Divrei Rabbi Yehuda says from the basis for this is because the Torah says, you shall not eat upon it chametz. And as we said, the meaning we're going to see means that upon the Korban Pesach, and the Korban Pesach is brought from noon in the afternoon, and Erev Pesach. Amalei Rabbi Shimon v'chiyaf shalem came, and Rabbi Shimon responded, is that really true? But the Torah says, don't eat chametz for 7 days, you should eat matzah. So that don't eat chametz upon it has to be talking about the 7 days of eating matzah, because the Torah says 7 days. And if you say chametz is prohibited even from noon beforehand, it's more than 7 days. Rabbi Yehuda Shabbat Kamalei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda, how's he going to respond? Because Rabbi Shimon has a good argument. Rabbi Yehuda is going to tell you, that's to tell you a new idea, that even nowadays, where we don't have a carbon Pesach, that it's still prohibited, that there's still an obligation of eating matzah. It's not to tell you that chametz is prohibited only at the time that there's an obligation of matzah. And when there's no obligation of matzah, there's no prohibition of chametz, and therefore Erev Pesach, in the 6 hours prior to Yontif, there's no prohibition of matzah, like Rabbi Shimon would like to explain this verse. But rather, it's to tell you that the obligation of eating matzah is all 7 days, regardless of whether you have a carbon Pesach or not. Because I may have thought, look, we don't have a carbon Pesach. And the Torah had said, you shall eat the Pesach together with matzah and maror. So I think maybe if there's no Pesach, there's no obligation of matzah. So the Torah says no. Don't eat chametz. For 7 days, you should eat matzah. Every year that there's a prohibition of chametz, there's an obligation of matzah, even if there's no carbon Pesach. That's the way to read it. Obviously, the prohibition of matzah, the prohibition of chametz is going to be even before Yontif. Like it says, lo techel alav chametz, upon the carbon Pesach, and the carbon Pesach already is obligated from the 14th in the afternoon. However, the prohibition of matzah and the prohibition of chametz and the obligation of matzah are linked in as much that any year that you're not allowed to eat chametz, you're also obligated in eating matzah, even if you don't have a carbon Pesach like nowadays. The Rabbi Shimon, and how does Rabbi Shimon know this? Where does he learn this idea that you have to eat matzah even if there's no carbon Pesach? Well, there's another teaching. The Torah says on the 14th day in the evening, meaning the evening of the 15th, you shall eat matzah until the 21st in the evening. So the Torah clearly says that these 7 days from essentially the 15th to the 22nd, the 14th in the evening, the 21st in the evening, you have to eat matzah. So we see clearly that's an independent obligation, regardless of whether there's a carbon Pesach or not. Rabbi Yehuda needs that for a different idea. Even in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, not everybody brought a carbon Pesach. Somebody who was tamei didn't bring a carbon Pesach that year. So even though that everybody else was bringing a carbon Pesach, everybody else was eating a carbon Pesach, but this person, because they were tamei, they had come into contact with a dead person, they would not eat a carbon Pesach. Nevertheless, they're obligated in matzah, and that's what we learn from that teaching from Be'erev Tochel Matzahs. You eat matzah regardless of whether you have a carbon Pesach. Also, somebody who was distant, who was too far away to bring a carbon Pesach, B'derach Rechoka, so also is exempt of the carbon Pesach that year, that 14th of Nisan. Nevertheless, wherever they are at home, they're going to have to eat a matzah, like we saw at the beginning of the Masechta that. In Netzivan, out in the north, in basically in Turkey, that we had Yehuda ben Beseira who had notified, who told this Roman who was acting as if he was a Jew and eating carbon Pesach. He told him to ask for the tail in order to let the authorities know in Yerushalayim that he wasn't really Jewish and he was trying to eat at the carbon Pesach. And what about him? He didn't bring a carbon Pesach because he was out all the way north in Netzivan. He was too far away. So he wasn't obligated in coming to bring the carbon Pesach, but he was obligated in matzah. Right, so he learned Rabbi Yehuda. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda says with this verse of Erev Tochel Matzahs. Because I may have thought, I may have thought since he doesn't eat a carbon Pesach that year because he's tamei or he's too far away, so he also doesn't eat matzah maror kamash malan. So that's why we need this verse to say he does eat matzah. Rabbi Shimon says no, that doesn't need a verse. Because it wouldn't be any worse than somebody who had not been circumcised or ben nechar, which we say means somebody who had abandoned Torah. In It says that an orel, somebody who's uncircumcised, may not eat a carbon pesach. Yet, who and the Torah infers by the fact that the Torah says lo yachal boy, do not eat in it in the carbon pesach. That tells us don't eat pesach, but the matzah you have to eat. But the other obligations of the day he's going to have to eat. Rabbi Yehuda ksiv b'hai uksiv b'hai. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, I need a teaching for each one of them. I need a teaching to tell you that somebody who's tamei eats or distant is going to need to eat eat matzah even though he doesn't bring carbon pesach. And I need to tell you that someone who is uncircumcised needs to eat needs to eat matzah even though he doesn't bring a carbon pesach. Because each one of them is a separate teaching, even though that I could have learned one from the other with a hekesh, with a comparison. And the 7 days of Matzah, Rashi tells you that the obligation of 7 days is really not a full obligation. If somebody doesn't want to eat at all, he doesn't have to. But the night of Pesach, the first night, he's obligated in Matzah regardless. And that's the comparison. But it's not going to tell you that somebody who is Tameh or is or Arel, each one is there to tell you that they are obligated in a Carbon Pesach, even though that they can't have the mitzvah of matzah themselves. We'll leave it at that. And tomorrow, as Hashem will go on with Rabbi Yehuda's the explanation of our Mishnah according to Rabbi Yehuda. Yashikach. Have a great night. And Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.